I'm really excited to do this training. I feel really lucky because this is a training that I am extremely passionate in, and I feel lucky just to be doing it in my work environment and sharing it with my coworkers. So thank you all for being here. So just to get started, second, just gonna make sure everybody can see my screen. Yes, all right. So just to get started, I just wanted to give a description of what this training is, just to remind everyone. So this training is intended to introduce participants to the concepts of gender identity and gender expression. After this training, participants will understand key terms connected to gender identity and the difference between gender, sex, and sexuality. Participants will also learn the importance of personal pronouns. The goal of this training is to help folks better engage with the concept of gender, what it means to be gender variant, and what actions we can do and we can take to create an inclusive, safe, and more comfortable environment for gender variant people, and honestly, all of us. So the goals of this training are to, we're going to review terms and definitions related to gender and gender identity. We're going to hopefully all have a better and deeper understanding of pronouns and best practices associated with pronouns. We'll have a better understanding of non-binary, gender non-conforming, genderqueer, gender fluid, and other kind of gender variant identities. And we'll have a discussion about specific issues regarding LGBTQ folks, and kind of throughout the training, a massive goal is really just for us all to have a better and deeper understanding to our relationship to gender and our relationship to privileges associated with gender. So just to move forward. All right, so just to begin, I'd love to start off with having a little bit of audience participation. If you have access to your chat, sorry if you're on a call, I'll describe what everybody's looking at. We're looking at images of babies, and there's a group of babies on the left and there's a group of babies on the right. So if the audience could just start off by looking at these babies and telling me what gender you are associating with these different groups of babies on the left and on the right.
Should we chat or say them out loud?
You can chat. Just so there's no audio feedback. So folks are saying left boys, right girls, left boy, right girls, boys on the left, girls on the right. Okay, so we're getting a lot of, okay, the boys on the left, girls on the right. What exactly is letting you know this? What's telling you? Caitlin says, could be any gender, but the babies in blue make me think boys, pink and blue colors. Okay, so we're getting a lot of the same reactions. So really, kind of to take from this is we're seeing that we have the babies on the right are in blue, and we're seeing, social construct of colors, pink and blue, clothing type, the colors and the types of clothing. These are all great answers. Awesome. So wonderful. So we're all seeing, somebody else also said flowers. Great. So we're seeing generally this difference in what we're associating with these two babies. So we have babies in blue on the right, and we're having a general association of these are boys, and the babies in pink, in blue on the left, and then the babies in pink on the right, we're having an association of that these babies are girls because we're seeing that they're in pink and they're in flowers. All right, now let's take a look at these babies. So now there's a different assortment of babies on the screen. What gender can you tell these babies are? Or if you can't, what is making it difficult to? So if someone's saying the colors are gender neutral, I can't tell. Neutral tones make it more difficult to associate a gender. Colors are more neutral. Right. Wonderful. Colors are neutral. So kind of generally overall, the previous babies, pretty readily, folks were able to associate that we're seeing boys in blue, we're seeing girls in pink. And now looking at these babies, there's a little bit less and more hesitancy of assigning genders to these babies. We're seeing neutral tones, neutral colors, nothing that's necessarily jumping out at us, telling us that that this is a baby girl or this is a baby boy. Wonderful. Now we're gonna look at these two children. What genders are we assigning to these two children? On the left and on the right. Girl left, boy right. The dress makes me think of girl, girl left, boy on the right. Awesome. Okay, great. So maybe a little bit of similarity to the first slide. We're associating what this child is wearing with being a girl, so the dress, and then on the right, we're seeing kind of more masculine clothing, so we're assuming a boy. This is actually the same person. This is Frederick Delano Roosevelt as a younger child and then as an older child. And this, what we're seeing here is like we're right now in this day and age, we're looking at FDR as like a toddler, and we're seeing the long hair, we're seeing a dress, we're seeing kind of light colors, and we're associating those with baby girls and femininity. But actually, at that time, it was very common for all babies to wear dresses and all babies to wear white, because white is very easily bleached, just in case anything spills, and then dresses are very easy to change because there's not as many garments holding the diaper in. So just much more accessible. So really our ideas of gender and what gender looks like has changed throughout the course of time. And so what was associated with being masculine or feminine clothing in the past is not what it is currently. Just kind of similarly how we were talking about how we were associating blue with the boys and pink with girls. Kind of actually a few decades ago, pink was actually a boy's color and blue is a girl's color. If you think about Cinderella, Cinderella is dressed all in blue. And the reason that pink is more associated with the boys' color or men's clothing is because red is royalty. And so pink is a lighter red, kind of referencing that the boys are being dressed in a royal tone and royal color. Great. Also, I just wanted to say if at any point anybody has any question, feel free to write it in the chat, and I'll be checking with Jean Spratt over the course of the presentation to check in and see if anybody has any questions. So moving forward, gender identity is important. As we can see, we're looking just at some babies and seeing what they were wearing. We are having massive associations and assumptions about about the genders of the children. It's relevant. How we look and how we think about people, how they act, gender is everywhere. And gender also applies to everyone. Whether or not we know it or think about it, gender is within our society, and it really is just encroaching on every aspect of who we are. And so just kind of reiterate, one intention of this training is to learn about gender and gender variant folks and the different terminologies that we associate with transgender people, but also it really is to highlight and hopefully empower folks to know that you do have a gender identity. Everybody has a gender identity and has a right to their gender identity. So moving forward, before we kind of get into more of the weeds with gender, I really want to differentiate sex versus sexual orientation versus gender identity. So when we talk about sex, we're thinking about the sex that someone was assigned at birth. And this is a phrase that's used to intentionally recognize and assign sex, not someone's gender identity. So when we think about sex, we're thinking about biology, we're thinking about physical, we're thinking about the person, the hormones, their genitalia, both internal and external. We're thinking about their chromosomes, everything that we think about that kind of physically makes up a person. When a baby is born, however, you might have noticed that I mentioned chromosomes, I mentioned hormones, I mentioned internal genitalia. However, when we're born, the only thing that a doctor looks at to determine what the gender of baby is that external genitalia. And so you'll notice that when we assign sex, we usually only assign sex in three categories: female, intersex, and male. And the actual mention of three might be new. The category of intersex might be a new term. Intersex is a really large category that actually doesn't really properly describe the variance of the variance of intersex people. But in large, intersex is kind of a bucket that folks use to anybody who, if a baby is born and the doctor looks at the baby's body and cannot say, I determined this is a boy, or I'm going to determine this is a girl, that baby is going to fall into an intersex category. There's a lot of history, a lot of pain, a lot of violence, discrimination associated with folks who are intersex, and that is a really large category that today I'm not going to go too much into, but that is of an entire conversation of its own, and that community has a whole other association with different violences and harassments and rights. So a huge category and a big lot of discrimination happening towards intersex folks. And in the past, actually, when a baby was born intersex, the doctor would perform surgeries pretty immediately, sometimes with or without the parent's knowledge, to have that baby fit within a box of whether the baby is a girl or a boy. So they would actually alter the child to make it fit and be comfortable for folks. All right, so that's sex. Just to remind us, just when we're thinking about sex, we're thinking about just physically what we're assigning somebody based on what we're looking at. Sexual orientation, then, is how a person characterizes their emotional, spiritual, and sexual attraction to others. So you might have noticed that I specifically didn't put anything about that person's gender, because sexual orientation is not about what that person's gender, it's how that person is characterizing their own attraction to other folks that might be dependent on gender. And if that is confusing, I'll get back to it. But really, the main takeaway of that is when we're thinking about sexual orientation, we think about gender, they're not connected. They're connected in terms of the labels we're putting on ourselves and on each other. But when we're speaking about gender identity, we're not talking about who someone's attracted to. And then gender identity, as you can see, is a person's internal self of them being man, male, woman, female, neither or another gender. So it's someone's own internal sense of their being versus who they're attracted to, if that makes sense. All right, so now let's play a clip. This is Katie Couric, and she has a really interesting documentary called The Gender Revolution, and it's a very accessible documentary because Katie Couric, which is very well known, where she really does kind of explore gender variance within youth and within folks. And so this is Katie Couric talking to someone and breaking down the idea of gender. Oops.
Let's unpack this whole gender conversation. You use a device or a character called the Genderbread Man. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. The Genderbread.
Yeah. I found it really helpful to think about gender in a few different distinct categories. Gender identity, how you define your gender and how you see yourself. Gender expression, the different ways that we present or perform gender through our actions, our dress, and our demeanor, and biological sex or anatomical sex, the physical characteristics that make up our body that in many people's minds equal gender. Okay.
So gender expression is the way you present yourself to the world. So you could be talking about the way you dress, the way you comb your hair or use product.
Yeah.
So everything kind of as it relates to the outside world.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, that's a perfect way of thinking about it. So even just, okay, so this is funny. The way that I'm sitting right now is a very feminine expression of sitting. It's like how we sit is gendered, right?
And meanwhile, I'm kind of man-spreading.
Yeah, you're man-spreading. You're not even giving me enough room to properly man-spread over here. This is the man cross, the masculine way of crossing a leg. This is just uncomfortable for me. It feels like so much.
It feels good to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like yoga. Okay, now let's do the girl.
Okay.
So gender is different than sexual orientation.
Yeah.
But a lot of people get them confused.
Yeah. Gender is who you go to bed as. Sexual orientation is who you go to bed with. If you haven't heard that one's important.
So let's talk about penises and vaginas, shall we? Well, let's just go right there.
If you haven't already talked about penises and vaginas, we need to talk about penises and vaginas because that's what everybody always thinks. Like immediately, as soon as you say gender, anybody who's walking by right now who's hearing us say the word gender, the first thing that's popping into their mind is external genitalia. So you're thinking about penises and vaginas.
So for the purpose of our discussion, the bottom line is your external genitalia does not dictate your gender.
Yeah.
Wait a second. Can you rewind that? The bottom line is your external genitalia does not dictate your gender.
Yeah. I mean, that I couldn't have said it better.
Awesome. All right, so just a little bit of a recap with Katie. So, and we're going to go into a few of the gender expression, gender identity that she spoke about, but that was just really a way to just kind of recap and differentiate between sex and gender. All right, so now we're going to break down gender. So as we know and experience, and as we've seen from this presentation so far, gender is complex and it's layered, and it reaches deep down into every aspect of our lives, from our clothing to our interaction to personal and collective histories and cultural histories. So we're going to start by breaking gender into separate categories to explore gender, to start exploring it, including roles, expression, and identity. So with gender roles reference how we're expected to act, speak, dress, groom ourselves, conduct ourselves in general on a basis based upon our assigned sex. And of course, this differs depending on where you might be. Every single culture, every ethnic group, every society has differing gender roles and gender expectations. So can we think of any examples of gender roles that we're familiar with in the United States? And if you do, you can type it into the chat. I'll read them. Jean will read them.
Okay, so we've got folks saying cooking and cleaning generally seen as a female role. Housework for women. Women are expected to do housework, clean, raise children. Men are considered to be the breadwinners. Women are expected to raise children and be the primary caregiver. Men equal working outside the home, making money. Outdoor work for men. Aggressive, male, submissive, female.
Great, wonderful, great answers. Well, yeah, and those are honestly the ones that were coming to my mind exactly. And actually, there's an image. If you're on phone call, sorry if you can't see it, but there's an image on the slide. It's showing the silhouette of who we're assuming is going to be a woman in pink and a man in blue, and have speech bubbles, and there's images in these speech bubbles. And in the woman's speech bubbles, it's a heart, it's ice cream, it's a baby pacifier, it's an apple, it's a tennis racket, it's movies, it's engagements, it's makeup. And in the men, it looks like a missile, wine, video games, money, bowling, cars, iPhones, the gym. So yeah, we have like these different associations where, you know, men are more aggressive. They're expected to do things that are more aggressive or more domineering. They're expected to be the doctors, the lawyers, the bosses, the CEOs, versus women generally, you know, in the United States have this expectation of the caretaker or the nurturer, which might look like the nurse, the secretary, the teacher, you know, all of which are wonderful occupations, but within the context of, you know, gender roles and how we're speaking about it, are, you know, kind of more towards like the idea of like the more nurturing role versus the more domineering role. All right, great. So gender expression then is the way a person acts, dresses, speaks, grooms, and behaves that might be seen as feminine, masculine, or androgynous. Gender expression does not necessarily correspond to sex assigned at birth or gender identity at all. It's just how somebody is expressing themselves. So some pieces of gender expression can come to someone naturally, while others can be forced upon a person. All right, so like I remember, to speak personally, in high school, I had long hair and I wore much more feminine clothing, not because that felt natural, but because I was looking around and within society, that is what I was being fed and told that I was supposed to do based on the gender role that I had at that time in society and my assigned sex as a trans person. Wonderful. So then gender identity is a person's own understanding of how they might identify within a gender category, like man, woman, male, female, boy, girl, transgender, non-binary. Gender identity cannot be observed, kind of going back to what we said before, how gender expression does not let you know what somebody's gender identity or assigned sex is. The only way you can know someone's gender identity is if they actually feel comfortable telling you. There's no right way to have a gender identity. There's no one way to have a gender identity, and every single person has their own gender identity, whether that's identifying within a category like man, woman, male, female, boy, girl, or not. How are we doing? Do we have any questions so far? I'll take like 20 seconds just to see. Nope, so far looking good. All right. So we'll move on. So we're talking about how gender expressions change over time, and gender is really like a part of our lives from the time we're born and before we're born. You know, if you think about baby showers and, you know, really what everybody wants to know when somebody's pregnant is what's the gender of the baby. And you know, people don't want to find out the gender of the baby. They'll usually have some sort of gender reveal baby shower that, you know, that might look like this if the gender is a surprise. People will sometimes, you know, choose sides if they're, you know, how many thinks it's going to be a girl, how many thinks it's going to be a boy. You go to the gender baby, you know, to the gender reveal party, and my goodness, a box opens or an explosion occurs, and now we find out what the gender of the baby is. It's a girl if pink balloons or pink explosion happens, the boy if blue dust is flying everywhere suddenly. And then along with now knowing it's a baby girl or a baby boy, we can now finally decorate the baby room. We know what to put everywhere. We know that to put pink and floral and soft textures in a baby girl's room. For a baby boy's room, it's much more what I'm saying, neutral tones, little man cave, maybe something, maybe some cars or something with tools, something kind of masculine to you know, influence the baby as they grow up, or, you know, just kind of reiterate the gender identity that we're assuming this baby has. And then when babies are born also, they're wrapped in pink or they're wrapped in blue. So it really is like, it's very subtle, and it might only have to do with like very, very soft pastel tones and colors. But even so, all of this is just influence on influence of the expectations that we're holding for these children, for these babies. And so kind of this idea is, I think of like as a traditional gender model, where we have a sex assigned at birth, which is SAAB, that's sex assigned at birth. The sex is either male or female, so we have a baby girl or a baby boy. And then once we have that assigned sex, and once we have that idea of who this child is based on that sex, there's this assumption, there's this list of assumptions that then occur, where if the baby has a penis, the baby is going to grow up to be a man. That man is going to be masculine, and that man is going to be a straight man. Same with a baby girl. We assume that we see a vagina when a baby is born. That baby is going to grow up to be a woman. She's going to be feminine and identify as a woman, and she's going to grow up and be straight and be attracted to straight men. And so here's where we see this linking and this sudden bringing in of sexuality. Sexuality is, I think, I see it as very, very harshly linked to the traditional gender model and this traditional idea of this flow pattern of like, once the baby's born, all of these different aspects of what their life is going to look like will line up. That makes sense. But this is not happen, and this is not reality. In reality, it doesn't turn out that way. Sometimes your baby will be born with ambiguous genitalia or intersex. Sometimes your baby will, from a young age, not follow these stereotypical traditional stereotypes or roles that you might have expected that they will. And then sometimes your child will grow up and will actually not identify as the gender they were assigned at all. In the case of what we're looking at right now, if you're on the phone call, is there's two images. On the left, it's a couple about to open a box that we're assuming would be either pink or blue balloons, and they open it, and instead it's a selection of rainbow balloons, so there's no determined gender. And then on the right, there's an image of a mom with her 3 daughters, all as young children, and then it's a kind of a glow-up photo of the mom years later with her 2 daughters, and we see that one daughter actually is now her son and his transition. So she actually has 2 daughters and a son. So this is just showing that and kind of highlighting that these ideas and these traditional models that we have set up for children and that we have set up for ourselves, this pressure, isn't actually reality and does not actually come to fruition all the time. And so there's this new gender model, this new idea of gender, where instead of this static stack of these columns of what your life is supposed to look like, it instead is evolving into a much larger spectrum, where we're realizing you're sex assigned at birth, even though we're used to the idea that it'll be categorized as male or female. There actually is this spectrum of what genitalia can look like when a baby is born. So it's not as static as we thought it was. male and female are the two most common boxes that we assign to children, but that's not reality, and that's not what actually occurs. There is this differentiation, and there are more things, and there are more ways that gender identity looks. Then we have gender identity. We have the spectrum of man to woman. The arrows here are really showing that we go between male and female, a man and woman, and beyond as well. So gender identity can be a man, a woman, in between, or apart from. And then same with gender roles. You can be masculine, you can be feminine, you can be both. If I think of quite a few of us think about different things that we like, I think all of us have different aspects of ourselves that we could categorize as feminine and masculine. So it doesn't necessarily make sense and doesn't follow reality to think that if you're a woman or if you're assigned female at birth, that the entirety of your core and being is only going to be feminine attributes. So this is an image called the gender unicorn. During the Katie Couric's video, there was a mention of the genderbread person. This is another version of the genderbread person, but they've kind of taken the person out of it to make sure that there's no associated with gender of that of the image. So instead it's a unicorn, and this is showing that really all of these different aspects or spectrums, that your identity can be, you can be have a gender identity as a woman, female, and girl, and then also straddle and also have a gender identity within a masculine category, identifying as male or female or man or boy. Gender expression can be masculine, feminine, or other. It can be a mixture. Your sex assigned at birth is showing that we're expanding out to that we have male, female, and this other category. Who you're physically attracted to can be not just one category, it can be men, women, or other genders, and the same with emotional attraction. So what this what this image is really doing is trying to break out of even the idea that the spectrum is just one line with the two ends being male, female, man, or woman. Really just breaking out of that and showing that you can pull out all these different aspects of who somebody is, and it doesn't have to just boil down to checking a box, one box or another box. This is a quote that really I think highlights and resonates with the experience of queer people and transgender folks, where queer people don't grow up as ourselves. We grow up playing a version of ourselves that sacrifices authenticity to minimize humiliation and prejudice. The massive task of our adult lives is to unpick which parts of ourselves are truly us and which parts we've created to protect us. And this is a really significant quote because I feel like this really does highlight this idea of gender categories and trying to fit these gender roles and these expectations, where we try, and then as we see, queer people and trans folks are resilient, and if it doesn't hold true, if that is not who you are, if you're lucky enough to be able to be in a space where you can explore that, that is a huge task of so many queer folks' experience and lives. All right, so now we're going to dive into some definitions and really start picking apart gender, kind of the different categories and terminology we use when we talk about gender. So when we talk about someone who is cisgender, the term cisgender is talking about somebody who does identify with their sex assigned at birth. The term cisgender is not indicative of someone's expression, their sexual orientation, what hormones they have, their physical anatomy, or how they're perceived. All that cisgender is telling you is that you are somebody who identifies and is comfortable with the sex assigned at birth. Cis is kind of an abbreviation of it, and cis is actually has a Latin root that in chemistry is talking about an atom that is on the same side of. It's referring to, are you on the same side of this molecule as another aspect of it? So are you in alignment with? Versus trans or transgender, which is talking about and describing a person who does not identify with their sex assigned at birth. So they are not in alignment with it. And the Latin root of trans and how we use it in chemistry is you are across from or just over away from or just not aligned with. So the term transgender is not indicative of someone's expression, their sexual orientation, hormonal makeup, physical anatomy, or how they're perceived. All that it's saying, it's a very large umbrella encompassing that this person does not identify with the sex they were assigned at birth. All right, so moving forward, we're going to now kind of venture under the gender umbrella, because I mentioned that transgender is an umbrella term. So we're going to kind of dive more into that and see what else, because there's a lot of umbrella terms within gender identity. So we just spoke about transgender, and transgender is an umbrella term that describes a person whose gender does not align with the sex they're assigned at birth. As said before, a transgender person might or might not identify in the gender binary, so might or might not identify as a man or a woman, and may or may not undergo gender-affirming medical intervention. So they might not transition or have surgeries or do anything that we think of when we think about what a gender-affirming medical intervention might be. So a transgender person is, again, someone who just does not identify with the sex they were assigned at birth, and they then might or might not be within the gender binary. Non-binary is an umbrella term that's describing a person who does not identify exclusively as a man or a woman. Non-binary can be used if someone feels like they're a mix of genders or if they have no gender at all. And yes, so some folks who do not identify as having a gender at all. One is agender. Another term is agender, which describes a person who identifies as having no gender. There's a lot of terminology that is about to be thrown out. I in no way am assuming that anybody is going to become a master in any of this terminology. All of these are extremely subjective. People identify with the terms that they feel describe them. What I'm trying to do here is really just give an overview of the different terms that are being kind of thrown around to give an idea and a little bit of substance to what and kind of where these terms are coming from. But again, if somebody's identifying with these terms, like they're identifying with that term based on their own personal experience and an understanding of themselves. So this is really just to kind of give a little bit of substance and a little bit of background for folks. Just understanding where these ideas are coming from. So non-binary is, again, just identifying outside of the gender binary, either as a mix of or just apart from gender at all. And then we have a few more. So we have genderqueer. And genderqueer is another term that is often used by folks not identifying within the binary. Same with gender fluid. The fluid part of this term really is used by folks who feel like they kind of flow between genders. Maybe they feel more masculine one day, maybe feminine another day, maybe more male one day. But it's really showing that their identity and how they are is just fluid and is moving. And then gender non-conforming is just describing folks who are expressing themselves in non-traditional ways. So it's similar to both transgender, non-binary, and genderqueer. In the gender non-conforming is an umbrella term. So really, to reiterate, there's just a lot of umbrella terms, and again, a lot of personal terminologies that people are using, but they really are kind of coming from this idea that gender is not as fixed, is not necessarily fixed, and is not necessarily falling into either category A or category B. That there is this fluidity and this experience, outside of this binary we've created. And just to kind of express that, we have this quote from this ecologist where each person can interpret their differences for themselves and identify with the term that resonates most with them. There are many people who identify with all of these terms and use them interchangeably. And that really is just the beauty of, I think, language and of also gender. Both language and gender is constantly evolving, constantly changing. It's different between individuals, it's different between societies. I have very dear friends who, both identify as genderqueer, but have different definitions of what that means for them. And it can feel overwhelming because you want to be able to respect people and you want to be able to identify somebody as they want. But really, what I kind of do find is the beauty of gender and the beauty of all these different terminologies and the fluidity in which we can use them is that people really can kind of harness their language and use it and empower themselves in a world and a society that really has not necessarily given folks that power. So language and the language surrounding gender is just, I think it's just wonderful. All right, and now we're going to talking about language. Now we're going to transition to pronouns and how we use pronouns. So gender pronouns, or pronouns, refer to someone's gender and refer to the ways that one wishes their gender identity to be expressed. So there used to be this term called preferred gender pronoun, or PGP, and it used to be used to refer to pronouns, but we're moving away from, or we have moved away from using the idea of the word preferred, as pronouns are not preferred. And using someone's pronoun is not optional. Someone's pronoun is that's their pronoun. So just taking the word preferred out of it to let folks know that it's not a preference, that is someone's pronoun, and that is the pronoun you should use for them if they're telling you. If never push someone for their pronouns if they don't want to share them. And then some people do not use gender pronouns at all, and instead will just use their name. And also, I wanted to mention, I've been writing folks with an X a few times. The X, folks, the folks with the KS is inclusive already of many different genders. The adding the X in writing is kind of expressing that intentional inclusion of everyone. All right, so how do we ask for someone's pronouns? The different ways you can ask for someone's pronouns, because it is new, and I feel like a lot of the time we are in group settings where we're being asked pronouns, but really we need to know folks' pronouns interpersonally as well. So a way that asks someone's pronouns is you can just ask, what pronouns do you use when you're introducing yourself? You can ask someone, what pronouns should I use for you in this space? That's a very important one, because that could change. Someone might not be out in certain spaces and might need you to change the pronouns that they use dependent on the space. You can also say, for my example, my name is Beckett and my pronouns are he, him. What about you? That's a really wonderful way to do it. You're not putting that person on the spot. You're not having them think, why are they asking my pronouns? You're saying these are my pronouns, and you're asking someone else for theirs. If you aren't sure of someone's name or pronouns, or you've already asked them or met the person, it is absolutely okay to ask someone again. It's just like asking someone's name. If you don't know and you want to be able to respectfully refer to them, you can ask someone's pronouns again. Or if it's not a good time, you can ask for them later. All right, how do you ask for someone's pronouns? So asking for pronouns can feel awkward at first, but it is so important to avoid misgendering people, and it absolutely becomes less awkward. You can introduce yourself and your own pronouns, just as we said before inviting someone else to share their pronouns. And just to reiterate, this is absolutely the ideal way, as you're taking that active step to create a protected environment, and you're giving the person the option to share what's comfortable for them, if anything. So you really are taking that step forward, and letting that person know, you're being invited to share this pronoun. You don't have to. And then also that. You're also, taking a step to say, like, I also am aware that there are different pronouns. So it does so much to create that protected environment. I'm going to really create that safe space just by asking someone their pronouns and introducing your own. And so just to remember, pronouns are not a preference. They're an important aspect of someone's gender identity. It's always appropriate to ask for someone's pronouns and respect when someone doesn't want to share their pronouns. If you're getting used to asking people pronouns and you're kind of just asking everybody their pronouns, there's always that chance that someone might be confused as to why you're asking them their pronoun, and might wonder as to why you didn't just assume their pronoun. That's okay too. It's really good for people to start thinking about these things and start thinking about, oh, like, I do assume that people are going to know my gender identity, or I do assume that people are going to know what pronouns to use for me. I wonder what it's like to not have that privilege. It's great also to come to terms with your own discomfort surrounding pronouns. If you have discomfort around sharing your pronouns, using someone's pronouns, asking someone's pronouns, it's good to sit with that discomfort and think about, like, what about this is so uncomfortable for me, or what about it is making me nervous, or seems unfamiliar. And it's always great, just bottom line is so good to ask questions first, and ask, pronouns first and ask names first, because so that conversations later are so much easier. All right, what do you do if you misgender someone? This is, I feel, one of the major fears of folks, and really one of the biggest reason that I feel folks not wanting to use someone's gender. So what happens if you do misgender somebody? So here's a few examples. You've just been corrected for using someone's wrong pronouns. You acknowledge it. Oh, I'm so sorry. You correct it, he, and you move on with your sentence. You've just accidentally used someone's previous pronouns and you caught yourself, which is an awesome thing. You acknowledge it, you apologize, you correct it, and you move on. You've just been corrected for assuming someone's gender. You acknowledge that you assumed someone's gender, you apologize, you correct it, and you move on. And that really is, it seems repetitive, but it really is meant to be repetitive. You do not want to get stuck over apologizing. That is drawing attention to the fact that you misgendered somebody, and all that person wants to do is move past that as quick. I'm making an assumption. This is how I feel about it. But if you misgender somebody in that interaction, it is awkward and it does hurt, and it does suck to happen. So you do just want to move on and fast away from it as quickly as possible. And by over apologizing, it's continuously drawing attention to the fact that you misgendered somebody, which, even though it is not about that person, makes it about that person suddenly. And makes it also about you, and you're apologizing, and your need then to be told it's okay that you corrected somebody or that you misgendered somebody. So again, best thing to do is you acknowledge it, apologize, and you move through it. And actively be aware of the mistake, and try to not make the mistake again. And again, if you do make the mistake though, you apologize it, you move forward. All right, so now I'm going to speak just about some specific issues surrounding LGBTQ folks, specifically gender variant people. So we've spoken a lot about gender, a lot about gender identity, but how does this actually affect people? How does this affect their lives? So it affects many different issues for transgender people, such as lack of legal protections, because there's no comprehensive non-discrimination law that includes gender identity in the United States right now. 18 states and the District of Columbia prohibit discrimination based on housing. 17 states, including the District of Columbia, prohibit discrimination in public accommodations like bathrooms. 15 prohibit discrimination based on gender identity and education. And there's legislation to prohibit trans people in public bathrooms. So there is like active trans discrimination in laws, just by the fact that well over half the states don't even have protections, and there is no federal protection for gender identity at the moment. And that there's continuous legislation and pushback of people going to the bathroom that they feel most comfortable in. Moving on to poverty, these lack of protections translate into poverty for many transgender folks. 15%. There was a survey conducted a few years ago. It was 2013 at this point, but at that moment, 15% of the transgender folks that they surveyed were living in poverty, and that was assumed to be less than $10,000 income. And then of that 15%, 34% were folks who were Black, and then 28% were folks who were Latina and Latinx. So huge discrimination and poverty, especially in the trans community, but especially in the transgender folks of color. For harassment and stigma, while definitely a lot of stigma and harassment has faded, it's still horrible. There is lots of politics use anti-trans stigma for political points, for bashing. Transgender folks continuously suffer from family rejection, from family harassment, from community violence. There's more conversations about it. We're learning more, but at the same time, there's the highest percentage of homeless youth are LGBTQ identifying. There's a huge percentage of homeless youth that are LGBTQ. There's a huge percentage of folks who are in poverty who are transgender, gender nonconforming. So it really is just, it's, you know, the environment is getting better, but not entirely, and it is not far reaching. So in terms of violence, 72% of hate crimes, this was a report so it was a few years ago, it was 2013, but 72% of LGBTQ hate crimes that were related to either LGBTQ or HIV, 72% were transgender folks. A huge percentage of hate crimes that are committed against trans folks are committed specifically against transgender women of color. I believe every single year the HRC conducts a tally on the number of trans people that are murdered every year, and predominantly every single year, the numbers ever since 2014, the number's been above 20 people, and that's only who was reported in the United States. But the vast majority, meaning 90% or more, are trans women of color that are living in the South, and that usually are in poverty in some way, are affected by poverty in some way. So it's absolutely an epidemic of violence committed against trans women, and against, you know, violence against the trans community at large, but specifically trans women of color are at the highest risk. The average lifespan of a trans woman of color is 35 years. So it's just, it's horrible. And then kind of on top of all this, we then have experienced barriers to healthcare. There is fear of exposing bodies within the medical field, as there's so many doctors and medical personnel who don't have a lot of trans competency. 20% of trans folks who were surveyed a few years ago were refused service based on bias. So 20% of trans folks who went to get medical attention were refused based on the fact that they were transgender in a medical establishment. And then thinking about documentation and identity documents. Without identity, you can't travel, you can't register for school, and you can't access a huge amount of services that are offered to folks. And it's also very unaffordable to have all these documents constantly changed. So thinking about how trans folks are already affected hugely by poverty, by lack of legal protections, by all this violence and stigma, layering on top of the fact that states require evidence of transitions that folks might not have access to, the unaffordability of changing all these documents consistently, and then, you know, not having identification to access basic needs, it puts transgender folks at a huge disadvantage for having many protections. And yet, throughout all of this, we are resilient, and trans people are consistently resilient. Trans people are consistently coming to terms with the fact that we're trans. We're finding each other, and we're finding our communities. We're uplifting ourselves. And, you know, even through all of this violence and horror, like we have a strong sense of community, and the people who surround us also really do just absolutely fight, and are so supportive. So even throughout all of this like horror and discrimination, we are resilient, and we are still here, and people are still showing up for us, and we're still showing up for each other. And this is also like how beautiful and what it can look like to show up for trans people. So we have Heather Green, who had her child come out as trans. She had a baby shower and had a baby gender reveal party when he was born, or when she was first pregnant and he was assigned female at birth. So he came out again, and she had a whole celebration of his gender. And then similarly, there was an announcement in 1995 for a daughter in Australia, and apparently they were mistaken. He's a wonderful son. So they say, whoops, our bad, tidy your room, loving you is the easiest thing in the world. And that's it, really. I really wanted to end on like a high note. There is a lot of discrimination and pain within the community, but also a huge amount of resilience, and really just all of us having this much more general collective understanding of gender and seeing how it does affect all of us on all these different levels. I really do think like will show folks that, you know, the different issues and the different the different issues and harassment and discrimination that trans folks are facing, don't apply to all of us, but do apply to all of us, because all of us do have these gender identities. And so that's where I'll end it. Thank you all very much. We're ending like basically right on time, which is awesome. If anybody has, oh, thank you, Kathy. If anybody has any, oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I'll keep on interrupting myself. Yeah, if any questions you have, my email is there. I am gonna do I'm doing a Gender 102 or 201 in August. That's gonna be more about actually like what you can do in your job and in an office setting to be active. And also June 1st, I'm doing a presentation on adverse childhood experiences and the LGBT community. So specifically looking at trauma, trauma that LGBTQ folks experience at youth and also in adulthood. So that's me. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you all. Well, thank you all so much.